All right, Alexander, we have the news that China's Xi Jinping will be meeting with Saudi Arabia's MBS. Very interesting meeting that is about to take place. And this is following Xi Jinping's meeting with Schultz. Schultz flew to Beijing to meet with Xi Jinping. And this is also coming at a time when Saudi Arabia is not exactly on the best of terms with the Biden White House, and I'm being very diplomatic there. And Saudi Arabia is actually pivoting, it seems, towards the East, towards BRICS, towards the SCO, towards what Lavrov calls a fair world order. And not only Saudi Arabia, a lot of other countries seem to be pivoting. Turkey, Iran. And we have a lot of strange reports coming out of the collective West about tensions between Iran and Saudi Arabia. And all of these reports seem to be coming just out of the collective West. It seems like they're trying to stir up some sort of controversy or conflict between the two out of the fear that all of these countries are pivoting towards this new architecture, this new financial and global architecture. And so you have Xi Jinping meeting with MBS. What is going on here?
Well, I think this is an enormously consequential meeting. Now, the key point to understand is you mentioned Schultz. Schultz came to Beijing, met Xi Jinping. We did a program about it. We discussed how Xi Jinping actually gave Schultz a lecture about, the importance of maintaining trust and understanding the concerns of your partner, and basically told Schultz, you've messed up completely with the Russians. Don't even think you can pull the same trick with us. And the difference is that this time Xi Jinping, as I understand it, is meeting with MBS. But he is traveling to meet MBS. He's going to go to Saudi. He's actually going to visit Riyadh and meet MBS there. So this is big news because Xi Jinping doesn't travel very often. He didn't travel at all during the entire pandemic period. He went to Samarkand in September, and now he's traveling to Riyadh to meet MBS. So he is coming, so it seems to me, to seal the deal with MBS. So China is becoming a major oil importer. So he wants to seal the oil deals with MBS. All of this is happening at the same time as the Russians are negotiating a massive oil and gas deal with Iran. So you could see how those two dovetail, along with the Turkish gas hub idea. You mentioned Turkey, Iran, Saudi Arabia. Well, you can see how they're all sort of tying in with each other. But the other thing he's going to do, and I think this is the key point of his visit, is that the Saudis want to join the BRICS. They've said so. And the Russians have said they support this. So Xi Jinping is going, it seems, to Riyadh to seal the deal, to say to MBS, we support you joining the BRICS, and the next time there's a BRICS summit, expect an invitation to be extended to the Saudis. So the BRICS will become the BRICS, and the Saudis will be joining the BRICS. Now, bear in mind that the BRICS, we know this is not a secret, are in the business of working out a reserve currency. This is all the BRICS states: Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, Saudi Arabia as well. Saudi Arabia, along with Russia, one of the world's, the biggest oil exporter. And what happens if this new reserve currency is launched? And if the Saudis say, as logically they would, well, you must pay for your oil, not in dollars anymore, but in this new currency that we, with our BRICS partners, are now in the process of launching. Well, in the short term, it
regime
blows the
change in Saudi
sanctions,
Arabia.
blows up the sanctions against Russia, because of course you'd be paying for, or if you're going to agree to this, you have to pay for your oil in a currency which the Russians have a say in. That's the first thing. So it's no more boycotting the Russian central bank and any of that. But secondly, of course, it undermines the whole position of the reserve currency status of the dollar. Now, what does the US do? Now, the US is not going to sit back and let this happen. So expect over the next few weeks, months, year or so, enormous tensions in the Middle East. This is by far the biggest challenge that the United States has witnessed to the reserve currency position of the dollar up to now. So they're going to pull every lever, every string that they can in Saudi Arabia to try to reverse this. They're going to put enormous pressure on MBS. They're going to put enormous pressure on the king. They're going to try to find the princes to mobilize against the MBS. We'll see how solid MBS is and how solid his position in Saudi Arabia is. But don't expect this to happen easily.
MBS must know this. I mean,
Of course he must.
Obviously,
Of
he
course
knows
he
this.
must.
If we know this, he knows
Yeah.
this, and China
Yeah.
knows this, and Russia knows this.
Of course this.
I mean,
Of course they do.
everyone knows that if MBS is going to make this move, I mean, they are going to come after him like we've never seen them come after a world leader. I mean, it's full-on regime change to the point of possible conflict.
Yes. Yes. And remember, there's American troops in Saudi Arabia. So, I mean, he's got to worry about
Yeah.
that
So
as
what
well.
does he do? What does
Well,
MBS
we'll
do?
see. We will see. There've got to be contingency plans. One assumes that there must be. I can't believe that the Chinese and the Russians, especially the Chinese, would be investing so much in this relationship with MBS if there wasn't some plan to make this work. But you're absolutely right. This is going to be the big geopolitical story of the next year or so. I mean, Ukraine is is the story of 2022. 2023 is going to be different. Ukraine is going to slip off the headlines. There'll be a political crisis in the United States, inevitably, especially if the Republicans, as everybody thinks, win the White House. There'll be an energy crisis and an economic crisis in Europe. But the geopolitical focus is going to switch back to the Gulf and to Saudi Arabia. And we'll be seeing what happens then.
Sometimes I think to myself when I'm reporting on Ukraine, I think it's the collective West is always the United States. I wouldn't even say the collective West. They're always trying to distract Russia by creating chaos in other places with regards to Ukraine. You know, they'll start flare-ups in Serbia with Kosovo, Metohija. They'll start flare-ups in Armenia, Azerbaijan, Moldova, Georgia, whatever. But in this case, it seems like it's the other side that's causing distractions for the United States and what they're trying to accomplish in Ukraine. In other words, I would say that the U.S., if this does go through and Saudi Arabia does push forward to enter the BRICS, I would say that the U.S. is going to have a very tough decision to make. Do we continue our focus on Ukraine and regime change in Russia, or do we drop that and focus in on not losing the reserve currency with regard to Saudi Arabia? I don't think the U.S. can pull off both.
No, I agree with
They're
that.
going to have to make a difficult choice. What is more important?
Yeah, I agree with that completely. Can I just say, I mean, that is the Republican criticism of the whole Ukrainian policy, that Ukraine is not ultimately important to the United States, that is not, there's no fundamental American interest in Ukraine. Of course, in Saudi Arabia, especially if Saudi Arabia links up with China, there is a huge American interest. And, there are a lot of Republicans who talk about this, and Trump sort of talks about it himself from time to time. So, a lot of Republicans, and not just Republicans, are saying this whole Ukrainian thing has been a massive distraction. A real concern has always been the challenge from China, The Chinese are now making big moves, and they're in the process of winning over the Saudis. And if they win over the Saudis and they're able to launch this reserve currency, and the Saudis go along with it, and the position remains firm in Saudi Arabia against us, then we have suffered a massive geopolitical defeat. And that must be prevented at all costs. And we can't really afford the luxury of adventures in Ukraine.
A final question. What is this? First of all, I think this explains this whole Iran-Saudi Arabia mystery attack, mystery conflict that they've been conjuring up for the past week. If you can comment on that. And what does Israel do if Saudi pivots in this direction?
It's a good question. I mean, the first point, I'm entirely with you. I think this whole story,
and it's a new Israeli government, by the way. Sorry, it's an old Israeli government, which is now back in. Control.
I mean, the thing to say straight away about this is that, of course, the Iran, the stories, the rumors about Iran being about to attack Saudi Arabia. Like yourself, I am convinced that they had Western origins. There was no reason to think this was going to happen. They had Western origins, and they were intended to create tensions between Iran, Saudi Arabia, and create trouble for the Chinese and the Russians, and for MBS as well. So I think that this is part of that, the beginning, if you like, of this attempt to wreck this emerging partnership between Saudi Arabia and the BRICS states and the other Eurasian states, and the rapprochement between Iran and Saudi Arabia, all of which is now beginning to cohere. So I've no doubt about this. I don't think this had any reality except as a, if you like, a spoiler. It didn't work, but it's only a small taste of what is coming. We're going to see all the various alphabet agencies of the American deep state. They're now going to be cranking out in operation round the clock. You're going to have all the think tanks, the NGOs, all of those working round the clock to try to reverse this. We'll be hearing all about the cruelties of MBS and his brutal dictatorship in Saudi Arabia, and the reason that, this all needs to be changed in some fashion. And, war is not impossible, I'm sorry to say. So, but that particular story in itself had no reality, and I've no doubt that it was deliberately spread by, ultimately by the United States and the Western powers. Now, what about Israel? Now, the important thing to understand is that who's come back? Netanyahu. Now, I cannot imagine. I mean, I know people have very strong feelings about Netanyahu, and I mean, I don't like the man, but I cannot imagine anybody, any leader in Israel who has the diplomatic skills that Netanyahu has, better diplomatic skills than Netanyahu has, and more experience and knowledge of how to navigate Israel through this very difficult situation. So he's got a good relationship with Putin. He's got a very strong personal relationship with Putin. He's not going to want to get into situations of supporting Zelensky or any of those crazy ideas that we see floated around. And I think he's also historically had good relations with the Chinese. And I can't help but think that he doesn't like Biden very much. Always remember that's the thread that unites all of these people. Xi Jinping, Putin, MBS, Erdogan. None of them like Biden. Netanyahu doesn't like Biden. If you get all of these people together in a room, the one thing they can all agree about is that none of them likes Biden. So Netanyahu, I can see that he might try to sort of hedge Israel's position, say to the Chinese and the Russians and the Saudis and all the rest, look, We remain America's friend. That's our history, that's our nature. But don't think of us as your enemy. We are not. We're never going to impose sanctions against you. We're never going to support any wars against you. We're never going to get involved in any conflict that involves you. At the same time, do understand we have our red lines. We have our interests. We're a militarily powerful state. You can't disregard us. We don't want to be your enemy. Don't be our enemy. And, that's, I think, the message that Netanyahu will be trying to convey. And as I said, I can't imagine anybody in Israel who's better positioned to do it than him.
Okay, just a thought came to my head before we finish the video. If this happens, I was just thinking, look what they did with Germany and Nord Stream, which was so much less of an importance than what Saudi Arabia and the reserve currency is. And look at how far they went with Germany and Nord Stream. I mean, everything is on the table if
Absolutely.
MBS really does go through with this pivot.
Yes. Totally agree. I mean, this is going to be brutal, and I presume, as you said, that MBS, who comes from a tough neighbourhood, knows this well. So he must be confident of the stability of his position. By the way, I'm sure this is why he's he's pursuing this rapprochement with Iran, because he must know that what he's doing, this recalibration of Saudi Arabia towards the rising powers, as he probably sees this in the East, is going to bring down the Americans on his back. So he doesn't want trouble from the Iranians as well. And, Iran trying to mobilize the Shias against the Saudi regime too. So, he must have worked this out. But he's got to know that these are going to be dangerous times for him. I mean, I didn't expect him to do this, by the way. I never thought that MBS had this kind of capacity to do something like this. But if I was advising him rather, I would advise him, don't just watch your back in terms of, who's around you, but be very, very careful about your personal security as well.
Yeah. And he hasn't done anything yet, we have to stress, but everything points to the fact that he's heading in that direction.
Yes.
And that's got to spook the U.S. in a big, big way.
Well, I mean, he has done one thing. He cut oil production, which they didn't want him to do. I mean, that already annoyed them a lot. And and now he's meeting Xi Jinping, which in itself is a step. And he's already said that he wants Saudi Arabia. I mean, Saudi Arabia is already a candidate member to join the BRICS and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. So he's already made some moves, but I agree, they're not the big ones. The big ones are still to come. And America is going to pull every stop to prevent him doing that. And as you rightly said, if they're prepared to blow up Nord Stream, the Nord Stream pipelines, well, anything and everything is on the table. Anyway, we'll see how MBS deals with that. The Chinese and the Russians will help him to the extent that they can, but we'll see what they do.
All right. Big news. Big changes. Yeah. All right. That is the show, the Duran.locals.com. Look for us on Rockfin as well. And go to the Duran shop. 10% off. Use the code. Good day. Take care.